Hello, friends. Imagine dark alleys, secret conspiracies, and people whose names are frightening to say out loud. Today we will venture into a world where the rules were dictated not by laws, but by those who broke them, and we will tell the stories of the most dangerous and influential criminals. In the 90s, Russia plunged into chaos. The Soviet order was replaced by gang wars, racketeering, and criminal clans. Thieves-in-law, organized crime groups, and hitmen who were feared even by the authorities. Welcome to our channel. In this episode, the top 10 criminal authorities of Russia and the CIS. From legendary thieves-in-law to creators of brutal organized crime groups, whose stories will make you ponder. Does human greed and cruelty exist? A limit. Today, you will embark on a journey into the shadows of Soviet and post-Soviet crime. We will tell you how gangsters took over cities, where and how their lives ended, and why the names of these people still resonate in criminal circles. Be sure to watch until the end. There, you will find the story of the father of Russian racketeering. Let's go! First on our list. This is a legendary figure, Aslan Yusoyan, known as Grandpa Hassan. A representative of the old school of thieves, he was born in Georgia, but built his empire in Russia. Aslan started stealing as a teenager, and at 18, he ended up behind bars, where he made the necessary connections. At an early age, he received the title of thief-in-law, and soon after, he created his own gang that extorted tribute from businessmen. Hassan's grandfather successfully developed his criminal empire until he was imprisoned for 15 years in 84. But even outside of freedom, Yusoyan did not lose his influence and maintained order in 8 more camps. Outside the prison, his clan grew, being replenished by young gangs. In 91, Yusoyan was released early and confidently settled in Moscow, although his empire stretched from the North Caucasus to the Urals. He placed his people and controlled drug trafficking, construction, and racketeering. In the turbulent 90s, when the police were cracking down on gangs, Yusoyan went underground. However, the war for the criminal throne did not subside. In the 2000s, his allies were dying one after another. One day, a bullet caught up with Hassan himself. A sniper wounded him, but not fatally. After that, Yusoyan became like a ghost, but on January 16, 2013, caution did not save him. Hassan was shot near one of Moscow's restaurants. His clan fell apart, and chaos of the new era replaced the old rules. Yusoyan remained a symbol of an era where the shadow of crime covered an entire country. Next in our list is the equally famous crime boss Vyacheslav Ivankov, nicknamed Yapinchik, whose life resembled a thrilling novel. Starting his career in the 70s with the band of thieves-in-law under Gennady Mongolkorkov, he quickly proved himself to be tough and calculating. In 1974, within the walls of Butyrka prison, he earned the status of a thief-in-law, solidifying his authority. By the early 90s, Yapinchik had moved to the United States. In New York, he established racketeering, smuggling, and money laundering operations, becoming the head of the Russian mafia. Local gangsters, having heard of his brutality, acknowledged Ivankov's leadership. However, in 1995, he was arrested for extortion. Even in prison, Yapinchik maintained his power, earning respect in a conflict with African-American inmates who tried to humiliate him. After being extradited to Russia in 2004, he decided to step away from criminal activities and dedicate himself to his family and fishing. But 5 years later, a sniper's bullet ended his life. Thousands of people gathered at the funeral, from gangsters to show business stars. The farewell, valued at $1 million, became a symbol of the end of an era. The coffin with lighting and air conditioning emphasized the status of the deceased crime boss. Yapinchik remained in history as a controversial figure. A ruthless criminal, yet a charismatic leader whose ambitions spanned across oceans. The next hero, a man who, according to the FBI, controls a vast international criminal network. The genius of the criminal world, Semyon Mogilevic, also known as Don Semyon, and the Brainy Don. His criminal career began in the 70s with fraud and currency manipulations. In the 90s, Mogilevic moved to Moscow, where he quickly integrated into the capital's criminal life. At that time, Semyon began collaborating with influential people in the criminal sphere, with the thief-in-law Vyacheslav Yapinchik Ivankov and the leader of the Orkovskaya organized crime group, Sergei Sylvester Timofeev. Together with his new acquaintances, he became a mediator between Russian criminal groups and foreign partners. After moving abroad, Mogilevic made his mark in Poland, Germany, and Hungary, where he started his business trading sweet soda. In Europe, Mogilevic rapidly expanded his influence, aided by his connections and authority in Russia. Don Semyon was involved in arms smuggling, buying up factories, When Mogilevic's business empire began to gain international scope, the astute Don set out to conquer the United States. One of the most notorious projects involving him was the scheme with the company YBM, Magnex. The company, disguised as a magnet manufacturer, was used for money laundering. About $10 billion passed through it. After the scheme was exposed, the gangster returned to Russia, where after a long search, law enforcement was finally able to apprehend him. Mogilevic spent a year and a half in a detention center on fraud charges. After the case was closed in 2011, Don Seaman disappeared. According to some reports, he lives in Russia under the protection of influential circles. According to others, the mafia boss moved to Israel. The American magazine Foreign Policy included Mogilevic in the ranking of the 500 most influential people in the world. As of today, the criminal authorities' fortune is approximately $10 to $12 billion. And we don't know, perhaps Don Seaman's criminal empire is only growing. This is the story of the most influential Georgian thief, Teriel Oniani, nicknamed Taro. From a young age, Teriel chose the path of crime. In the turbulent 70s, ending up in Soviet prisons, he underwent the brutal initiation ritual of the thieves in law, the elite of the criminal world, living by their own rules. And in the 80s, he created his own powerful criminal group, the Kutaisi Organized Crime Group, which included no less than 500 members. Taro's criminal career is filled with conflicts. One of them was with Yepenchik, who stripped Meho, Oniani's closest protege, of his thief's crown. Fearing revenge from Yepenchik's associates, the thief-in-law hid in Europe, first in France, and then in Spain. There, he found support from another criminal authority, Shakro Malik. Their alliance became a key element in the balance of power in the criminal world. The next bloody conflict erupted between Taro and Dead Hassan over control of Sochi, where huge cash flows appeared due to the 2014 Olympics. Hassan publicly challenged Oniani's thief status, sparking a war. It only ended after Hassan's death. In the 2010s, Taro ended up in a Russian prison for kidnapping, but even behind bars, he continued to manage affairs. After being released from the Black Dolphin after a decade-long sentence, Taro was extradited to Spain, where he served 2 years for money laundering. Currently, Taro remains in Spain. His fate is currently unknown, but most likely, he continues to keep the criminal world in fear. The next figure in the crime world of the 2000s is Zahar Kalashov, also known as Shakro Mullet. Zahar, by origin, comes from the highest spiritual caste, and his fate seemed predetermined, but instead of a temple, he chose prison cells. In 1971, he was crowned a thief-in-law, opening the path to the criminal world. By the 80s, after serving several sentences, Kalashov moved to Moscow. Here, he connected with criminal legends, Dead Hassan Yepenchik, becoming one of the most influential authorities. After a series of assassination attempts in 2003, he fled to Spain, where he created a money laundering empire. But just 3 years later, the Spanish authorities caught up with him, sentencing him to 9 years in prison and a fine of 20 million euros. His arrest shook the criminal world. A clan war began, claiming the lives of former associates. Georgia demanded extradition, but Kalashov, holding Russian citizenship, returned to Moscow as a free man. In 2015, he found himself at the center of a high-profile extortion case and a shootout on Raktal Street in Moscow. Arrests of his people followed, and within 3 years, Kalashov was sentenced to 9 years. But even behind bars, he remained a shadow king. In 2024, nearly blind, he was released early. It is said that the key to his release was his recruitment of inmates for combat zones. The story of Shakro is a bloody pattern of power, betrayal, and the ability to survive in a world where the law is written with knives and gold. Sergei Badorin, nicknamed Ozha, is the next hero of our crime chronicle. On November 9, 1964, Sergei Badorin was born in Ostashkov, the future nightmare of Russian crime. In 1990, together with his younger brother Alexander Zamba, he robbed the apartment of the collector Vori Magits, stealing masterpieces worth 9 million euros. This was the start of his criminal path. Soon, Badorin became the master of Odinsovo. His crew eliminated competing organized crime groups. In 1993, after joining the Orkhovskaya group, he waited for his moment. After the murder of the leader Sylvester, he orchestrated a bloody purge, becoming the new boss. His rule was that traitors were dealt with, even his own. In 96, when the criminal investigation caught up with him, Badorin faked his death by placing a tombstone in the cemetery, and fled to Spain with a new face. Rumor has it, he underwent several plastic surgeries. But his ghost continued to rule the gang. In 2001, he was caught in Barcelona while leaving a brothel, along with a weapon and a bodyguard. The Spanish court sentenced him to several years. After serving his time, he was extradited to Russia, where Oja received a life sentence for 30 murders, including the assassination of the hitman Solonik. His son Grigory died under mysterious circumstances in 2017. His brother, Zamba, after serving 9 years, now lives quietly in the shadows. As for Oja himself, almost a legend, he remains behind bars. Korikov, who traded Rembrandt paintings for a life sentence, will long be remembered by everyone involved with organized crime. This is a story about a criminal oligarch and a king of double life, who was friends with politicians and artists. Otari van Trishvili. He was born in 1948 in Georgian Zestafoni. But fate brought him to Moscow, where Adaric van Trishvili became a legend, balancing between hell and paradise. By the age of 18, he was a master of sports in Greco-Roman wrestling. Brilliant prospects were opening up for him, but soon he was arrested and ended up behind bars. Of the 9 years sentenced by the court, van Trishvili served in a colony, and then was transferred to a psychiatric clinic, where after a short course of treatment, he was released. After his release, Otari got a job as a wrestling coach in Moscow's Dona. But in addition to this activity, Kven also had a less respectable job. Together with his older brother, he became a card player, and his athletes were involved in extortion and providing protection for criminal elements. Friendship with Yatinchik opened the doors to the criminal Olympus for him. But Otari thought bigger and, together with his brother, created an association through which they took 10% from businessmen for protection. That is, protection from the rampant organized crime groups at the time. He was actively developing not only in criminal activities but also in legal ones. He opened funds to help athletes and the police, and created a political party for the athletes of Russia. Adaric dreamed of restoring order, but on April 5, 1994, a sniper caught up with him near the Krasnopresnensky baths. At the funeral, broadcast live, champions, artists, and crime lords wept. Who was he? A philanthropist who privatized charity, or a mafia genius who bought the country's loyalty? His life is a mirror of the era, where the gym became a forge for racketeering, and charitable foundations a pretext for criminal activity. The next hero is the shadow and enigma of the Caucasus. Mavlady Ruslan Atlangerev. He was born in 1954 in exile in Kazakhstan, the son of deported Chechens, whose fate seemed to predict a path of an outcast. But Mavlady Atlangerev, nicknamed Ruslan, turned knowledge into a weapon. Dropping out of a prestigious Moscow institute, by the late 80s he led a shadow empire that controlled almost the entire car market, a network of stores, most hotels, casinos, and restaurants. His group, the Lozenskaya Organized Crime Group, became a shield and sword for its own, and he himself became an arbiter in the bloody disputes of the mafia. In the 90s, he was tried for extortion, and during his sentence, he was crowned as a thief in law. After being released, he went to Chechnya, where, according to some reports, he collaborated with the FSB and participated in negotiations between militants and federal troops. Periodically, Atlangerev returned to Moscow, where he gradually began to legalize his business. He had significant influence in the republic, but everything collapsed after the assassination of the president of Chechnya, Ahmed Kadyrov. The power of the deceased leader's son did not tolerate competition, and in 2008, Atlangerev disappeared. His trail ended in the basements of Grozny. The body was never found, leaving room for legends. Some say he perished under torture, others that he faked his death. What happened to Truslin? Perhaps we will never know. Now let's talk about the head of the Orkhovskaya organized crime group, the king of the criminal world. In the 90s, Sergei Timofeev, nicknamed Sylvester. Sergei Timofeev, a village boy who, after the army, came to the capital and got a job as a mechanic. And in the mid-80s, he got involved with the gang from Orakovo and started engaging in thimblerigging. In the gym on Shipolovskaya Street, a legend was being born. Sylvester, a karate coach and the unofficial boss of the southern outskirts. His Orakovo gang, which started with thimblerigging and car thefts by the 90s, had turned into an empire terrorizing Moscow. He did not become a thief in law. He preferred power without titles. His alliance with Yapenchik reshaped the map of the capital's crime scene. Together, they crushed the Caucasian organized crime groups, dividing banks and oil. Sylvester was the first to start using professional hitmen, which made him elusive. However, in 1994, his car exploded in the center of Moscow. Who killed the king? According to one version, the client was Adric van Trishvali, who didn't share casino profits with him. Sylvester's death left a vacuum in which his crews tore each other apart. His widow, Lyubov, showed photos 20 years later. In them, not a gangster, but a smiling man with children. But in the memory of Moscow, he remained a ghost. Of the 90s, a guy from the village who became a shadow that still whispers from the Kovinska cemetery. His death became a symbol of the ruthlessness of the 90s. As the media wrote, Sylvester left, leaving behind only ashes and blood. His story is a reminder that in the world of crime, there are no eternal winners. And concluding our list is the founding father of Soviet and Russian racketeering, Gennady Korkov, nicknamed Mongol. The thief skillfully used psychological torture, alternating it with physical violence, and was a terror in the criminal world. He was born on December 5, 1930, in the provincial town of Kulabaki. But his fate was forged in the back streets of Moscow. Gennady Korkov, nicknamed Mongol for his Asian features, became the scourge of Soviet crime. After his first sentence for theft in the 60s, he realized that petty thefts were for the weak. By the 70s, his gang of cutthroats was terrorizing the capital, turning the lives of black marketeers and underground factory owners inside out. The future legendary Yapenchik, executioner, and bitumen worker turned the forest into a torture chamber. Victims were hung from trees, sawed in coffins, and had their psyches broken. Racketeering didn't have a name yet, but Mongol was already writing the rules for it. He broke the thieves' code by demanding tribute from underground millionaires and the thieves. At a meeting in Kislovodsk, they first threatened him with retribution, but then accepted his methods as the norm. Thus was born the union of capital and crime. Years in the camps did not break him. In 81, he was released from prison, and in the 90s became the overseer of Moscow. However, his health significantly deteriorated behind bars. Mongol's life ended in 94. He died from liver cirrhosis. His legacy is not just criminal schemes, but a system where fear became currency. Even Yapenchik, his disciple, was merely a shadow of the first Mongol, who turned crime into an industry. Well, friends, here they are, the people who once decided the fates of millions. Their stories are not a reason for admiration, but a warning. Crime never ends. All right. If you're interested in such investigations, like, subscribe, and comment on which of them you've heard about. See you again in a world where shadows still whisper forgotten names. Goodbye.